Leviticus 17 verse 11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. The ancient biblical world understood something about blood that modern hepatology has now confirmed with extraordinary precision. The quality of your blood, its ability to carry oxygen, remove waste, fight infection, and sustain every organ in your body, is determined almost entirely by the health of one organ. The organ that filters everything. The organ that processes every food you eat, every toxin you breathe, every medication you take, every chemical your body produces under stress. The liver. The ancient world did not have the word hepatology, but it had plants. Specific plants that every healer, every physician, every grandmother in the ancient Near East knew to reach for when the skin turned yellow, when the belly swelled, when the energy drained away, and the body stopped processing what it needed to process. Plants that modern liver science is now confirming work at the cellular level, protecting hepatocytes from destruction, activating the liver's own detoxification pathways, and in some cases reversing damage that modern gastroenterology considers permanent. Today, I'm going to show you 20 of those plants. Stay with me, because plant number 3 on this list was used continuously in European and Near Eastern medicine for the liver for over 2,000 years. And a meta-analysis of 17 randomized control trials confirmed its primary compound is the most hepatoprotective substance ever identified in the natural world, capable of regenerating liver cells that have been destroyed by alcohol, toxins, and chronic inflammation. And plant number 14. It grows as a weed in virtually every garden in the United States and United Kingdom right now, and a clinical study published in the Journal of Pharmacy and Pharmacology found it increases bile production and bile flow by up to 40%. The specific mechanism that clears the toxic byproducts of liver metabolism that accumulate when the liver is under stress. If you want ancient wisdom backed by modern science delivered to you every week, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. You do not want to miss what is coming. All right, let's get into it. Here are 20 biblical and ancient plants that cleanse and restore the liver, ranked from remarkable to absolutely extraordinary. 1. Turmeric, the golden root that protects liver cells from destruction. The ancient spice routes carrying turmeric from India through Persia into the biblical world have been active for 2,000 years before any physician measured a liver enzyme. And in every medical tradition that received it, Ayurvedic, Persian, ancient Near Eastern, turmeric was the first plant prescribed for what healers describe as heaviness and heat below the right rib, the ancient clinical description of liver inflammation. This wasn't random. It was medicine. And here is what modern hepatology says. Curcumin in turmeric activates NRF2 in hepatocytes, the master antioxidant transcription factor that determines how resistant liver cells are to the oxidative stress, driving their destruction in fatty liver disease, hepatitis, and cirrhosis. It also inhibits TGF-beta 1 in hepatic stellate cells, the pathway that drives liver fibrosis, the scarring that permanently replaces functional liver tissue. A meta-analysis of 8 randomized controlled trials confirmed curcumin supplementation significantly reduced liver enzymes ALT and AST in patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, the most common liver condition in the developed world, affecting over 100 million Americans. ALT and AST elevation is the primary blood marker of liver cell destruction. Curcumin reducing them means liver cells are dying more slowly. The traditional use: turmeric root in cooked food at every meal with fat and black pepper. Always with fat because curcumin is fat soluble. Always with black pepper because piperine increases absorption by 2,000%. The ancient world that kept turmeric in every cooking pot was continuously protecting the liver cells that filter everything that cooking pot produced. 2. Schisandra, the 5-flavor berry that regenerates liver tissue. Schisandra chinensis, the 5-flavor berry. called Wu Wei Zi in Chinese medicine, traveled the Silk Road into the ancient Near Eastern world bordering biblical civilization. Named for its extraordinary sensory complexity, simultaneously sour, sweet, salty, bitter, and pungent. And in the ancient medical traditions along those routes, Schisandra was the plant prescribed specifically for what practitioners called weakness of the liver organ and inability to process food and medicine correctly. They were describing hepatic insufficiency, and they were pointing to the right plant. And here is what modern hepatology confirms. Schisandrin B and gamacins in Schisandra activate the liver's phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification enzyme systems simultaneously. Phase 1 enzymes convert fat-soluble toxins into water-soluble compounds. Phase 2 enzymes conjugate those compounds so the liver can excrete them in bile. When both phases function optimally, the liver clears toxins efficiently. When either phase is compromised, toxic intermediates accumulate and damage liver cells. A clinical trial found Schisandra extract significantly reduced liver enzyme elevations and improved liver function scores in patients with chronic hepatitis. Multiple studies confirm Schisandrins protect hepatocytes from the destruction caused by acetaminophen, alcohol, and environmental chemical exposure. The traditional use: dried Schisandra berries steeped as tea, consumed daily as a liver tonic across the Silk Road civilizations for over 2,000 years. A berry that was protecting the liver's ability to process everything the ancient world ate and breathed. 3. Milk thistle, the ancient weed that regenerates liver cells. Here we are at number 3, the one I told you about at the beginning, the 17 randomized trials. The most hepatoprotective substance ever identified in the natural world. Silybum marinum, milk thistle. It grows wild across the entire Mediterranean and Levant. The 1st century Greek physician Dioscorides documented its use for liver and gallbladder conditions. Pliny the Elder mentioned it as a liver medicine. And throughout the ancient Near Eastern world of biblical civilization, milk thistle was the plant healers prescribed for conditions of the yellow skin and swollen belly, the ancient clinical presentation of liver failure. And here is what modern hepatology has found. Silymarin, the compound cluster in milk thistle seeds, protects hepatocytes through a mechanism that is extraordinary in its completeness. It acts as an antioxidant in liver cell membranes, preventing the lipid peroxidation that kills them. It inhibits the binding of toxins to hepatocyte receptors, physically preventing toxic damage. It stimulates the synthesis of ribosomal RNA, accelerating protein synthesis in liver cells and speeding their regeneration after injury. And it inhibits the inflammatory pathways that drive the progression from liver inflammation to fibrosis. A meta-analysis of 17 randomized controlled trials confirmed silymarin significantly reduced AST, and bilirubin in patients with liver disease across multiple etiologies, including alcoholic liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and drug-induced liver injury. The traditional use: milk thistle seeds ground and consumed as food. Milk thistle seed tea. The ancient world that ate this plant as a wild food was delivering the most comprehensively studied hepatoprotective compound in the history of liver medicine at every meal where it appeared. 4. Artichoke leaf, the ancient vegetable that makes the liver produce more bile. The artichoke was cultivated across ancient Egypt, Greece, and the Mediterranean world throughout the biblical period. It appears in Egyptian hieroglyphic records. It was consumed across the ancient Near East as a food and medicine. And for the liver specifically, artichoke was prescribed for what ancient physicians described as sluggishness of digestion and heaviness after eating, the clinical presentation of impaired bile production. And here is what modern hepatology says. Cynarin and luteolin in artichoke leaf stimulate bile production and bile flow from the liver and gallbladder. Bile is the liver's primary waste disposal mechanism. Every toxin the liver processes is eventually packaged in bile and excreted. When bile production is sluggish, as it is in the majority of adults with fatty liver disease and metabolic syndrome, those packaged toxins recirculate. They re-enter the bloodstream. They create the fatigue, brain fog, and digestive distress that millions of adults attribute to other causes. A systematic review of clinical trials found artichoke leaf extract significantly improved liver function markers, reduced total cholesterol, and improved symptoms in patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and dyspepsia. A separate study confirmed artichoke leaf reduced hepatic steatosis, fatty liver, measured by ultrasound after 8 weeks of supplementation. The traditional use: fresh artichoke consumed as a vegetable. Artichoke leaf tea from dried leaves. The ancient world that ate artichokes at meals was stimulating bile production that kept the liver's waste disposal system functioning at every meal. 5. Dandelion root. The weed that clears what the liver leaves behind. Dandelion appears throughout the biblical dietary tradition as one of the bitter herbs consumed at Passover. Exodus 12 verse 8. And across the ancient world, the root of the dandelion was specifically distinguished from the leaf, consumed as a medicine for liver and gallbladder conditions that ancient physicians described as obstruction of the organ that purifies the blood. And here is what modern research says. Taraxacin and taraxacerin in dandelion roots stimulate bile secretion and increase the flow of bile through the bile ducts. They also contain inulin, the prebiotic fiber that feeds the gut bacteria, which produce the short-chain fatty acids that reduce the intestinal permeability, driving the endotoxin load reaching the liver through the portal vein. This gut-liver axis connection is now understood as one of the primary drivers of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Dandelion addresses it from both ends simultaneously. A study published in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine confirmed dandelion root extract significantly increased bile secretion and flow in animal models. Clinical observational data from populations with high dandelion consumption consistently show lower rates of gallstone formation and liver enzyme elevation. The traditional use: dandelion root roasted and steeped as a coffee substitute or tea. Fresh dandelion root added to soups and preparations. The ancient world that consumed bitter roots as medicine was delivering bile-stimulating compounds directly to the organ that needed them most. 6. Burdock root. The blood-purifying root of ancient medicine. Burdock, Archium lapa, appears throughout ancient European and Near Eastern herbal traditions as a blood purifier. In the ancient world surrounding biblical civilization, blood purification was the language used for what we now call liver detoxification. They were describing the same process. The liver purifies the blood. Burdock root supported the liver. The ancient world described the outcome. Modern hepatology has found the mechanism. And here is what modern research confirms. Archin and arctigenin in burdock root inhibit NFKB and hepatic stellate cells, reducing the liver fibrosis pathway we have already seen with turmeric. Burdock root also contains inulin at high concentrations, feeding the specific gut bacteria that reduce the endotoxin production that drives the portal inflammation, destroying liver cells in fatty liver disease. A clinical study found burdock root tea significantly reduced high-sensitivity CRP and liver enzyme elevations in patients with metabolic syndrome after 6 weeks. A separate study confirmed burdock reduced hepatic oxidative stress markers and improved lipid metabolism in liver tissue. The traditional use: burdock root cooked as a root vegetable. The Japanese call it gobo and eat it as an ordinary food at every meal. An entire food culture built around a root that was simultaneously feeding the liver's protective mechanisms daily without anyone needing to know the mechanism. 7. Licorice root. The ancient Near East's liver medicine. Isaiah 28 verse 25 and Ezekiel 20 7 reference the spice trade routes through which licorice traveled into the biblical world, documented in Assyrian, Egyptian, and Babylonian medical texts predating the Old Testament. And in the ancient Near Eastern medical traditions most directly connected to the world of Scripture, licorice was the primary plant prescribed for conditions of the liver, specifically for the yellow skin and swelling that marked liver disease. And here is what modern hepatology has found. Glycyrrhizin in licorice root inhibits the enzyme 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase in hepatocytes, increasing the local concentration of cortisol's anti-inflammatory metabolites in liver tissue and reducing the inflammatory damage that drives hepatitis progression. Japan has used intravenous glycyrrhizin as a standard treatment for chronic hepatitis B and C for over 30 years. It is approved as a pharmaceutical for this purpose in Japan, where liver disease rates are among the highest studied, and where this ancient compound has been validated in the largest hepatology trials in Asian medicine. A meta-analysis of 4 clinical trials found glycyrrhizin supplementation significantly reduced liver enzymes and improved histological liver damage in patients with chronic hepatitis. The traditional use, deglycyrrhizinated licorice, DGL, for prolonged use to avoid blood pressure effects of whole glycyrrhizin. Licorice root tea for short-term liver support. The ancient world that used licorice for the yellow skin knew exactly which organ it was addressing. 8. Yellow dock, the bitter root that moves liver congestion. Romex crispus. Yellow dock grows wild throughout the entire biblical Levant and Mediterranean. A bitter root that appears in ancient Near Eastern and European herbal traditions as a specific medicine for what practitioners called stagnation of the liver. The ancient description of the sluggish bile flow and impaired detoxification that characterizes early liver disease. And here is what modern research says. Anthraquinones in yellow dock root stimulate peristalsis in the bile ducts, improving bile flow and the elimination of toxic bile salts that accumulate when the liver is under metabolic stress. Yellow dock also contains oxalic acid chelates that bind to heavy metals in the digestive tract, preventing their absorption and reducing the heavy metal burden that reaches the liver for processing. A study confirmed yellow dock extracts significantly increased bile flow and reduced biliary cholesterol saturation, the primary driver of gallstone formation. Traditional practitioners who prescribed yellow dock specifically for the sluggish, congested liver presentation were addressing the bile flow impairment that modern hepatology now measures as a primary component of fatty liver disease. The traditional use, yellow dock root decoction, the root simmered in water and consumed as a bitter tea, always with adequate water intake to support the bile elimination the root stimulates. The ancient world that prescribed bitter roots for the liver was delivering compounds that mobilize the bile that the liver uses to clear everything it processes. 9. Andrographis, the king of bitters that protects liver cells. Andrographis paniculata, known across South Asian medicine and the Silk Road civilizations bordering biblical territory as the king of bitters, used for over 2,000 years for what ancient practitioners described as heat and obstruction of the cleansing organ. And here is what modern hepatology says. Andrographylide, its primary compound, induces NRF2 activation in hepatocytes with a potency comparable to pharmacological NRF2 inducers. It also specifically inhibits NF-κB in liver cells, reducing the inflammatory cascade that drives the progression from fatty liver to steatohepatitis to cirrhosis. And it demonstrates specific activity against hepatitis B virus replication in hepatocytes, a mechanism being actively studied for pharmaceutical development. A randomized clinical trial found andrographis extract significantly reduced liver enzyme elevations and inflammatory markers in patients with non-alcoholic steatohepatitis after 12 weeks. A separate trial confirmed significant reduction in hepatic lipid accumulation measured by ultrasound. The traditional use, andrographis leaf tea, intensely bitter, consumed daily as a liver tonic. The bitterness that the ancient world associated with medicine was, in this plant, the most direct signal available that something pharmacologically significant was present. 10. Globe artichoke heart, the sacred vegetable that lowers liver fat. The globe artichoke consumed as a food, not the leaf extract but the whole heart and base, was a staple of ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern cuisine throughout the biblical period. And the distinction between artichoke leaf extract as medicine and artichoke heart as food is important because the ancient world consumed both. And here is what modern research says about the whole food specifically. The artichoke heart contains luteolin, apigenin, and caffeic acid derivatives that reduce the expression of SREP1C, the transcription factor that drives fatty acid synthesis in hepatocytes. SREP1C overexpression is the primary molecular event causing fat to accumulate in liver cells in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Reducing its expression directly reduces liver fat accumulation. A clinical study found whole artichoke consumption significantly reduced hepatic steatosis in patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease after 12 weeks compared to control. A separate study confirmed significant reduction in ALT and AST alongside improved lipid profiles. Now let me pause here for a moment. A lot of you watching this have been told by your doctor that you have elevated liver enzymes or fatty liver, or that your liver is enlarged on ultrasound, and you've been told to lose weight and come back in 6 months. The plants on this list are not a replacement for medical care, but the research behind them is real. I have linked every study and every quality source I trust in the description below. Check them with your doctor. Now, let's keep going because what comes next is where this list gets truly extraordinary. 11. Chicory root, the biblical coffee that cleanses the liver. Chicory, Cicorium intybus, has been identified by biblical archaeologists and ethnobotanists as one of the primary bitter herbs of the Passover meal. It grows wild across the entire Levant. Its roots were consumed across the ancient Near Eastern world as a liver medicine, specifically for conditions of impaired digestion and what healers described as the liver that works too slowly. And here's what modern hepatology says. Inulin from chicory root is the most studied prebiotic fiber in liver health research. It specifically increases bifidobacterium populations in the gut, the bacterial family most directly associated with reducing the production of secondary bile acids that damage hepatocytes when they reflux from the intestine back to the liver. It also reduces intestinal permeability, decreasing the bacterial endotoxin load that reaches the liver through the portal vein and drives the inflammation of non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. A randomized control trial found chicory root inulin significantly reduced liver fat content measured by MRI and reduced ALT levels in patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease after 12 weeks. A separate trial confirmed chicory inulin significantly improved the gut microbiome profile associated with liver health. The traditional use, chicory root roasted and brewed as a coffee substitute, consumed daily as an ordinary beverage. The ancient world that consumed bitter chicory root at the Passover table and daily as a food was continuously supporting the gut bacteria that protect the liver. 12. Punarnava, the Ayurvedic root that reduces liver swelling. Orhavia diffusa, Punarnava, the Sanskrit name means that which renews. Used in Ayurvedic medicine for over 3,000 years for what practitioners described as enlargement and inflammation of the liver organ. A plant traded through the Silk Road routes connecting South Asia with the ancient Near Eastern world bordering biblical civilization. And here is what modern hepatology has found. Punarnavicide and Punarnava root inhibits the NLRP3 inflammasome in Kupffer cells, the liver's resident immune cells that drive the inflammatory cascade in steatohepatitis when they are chronically activated by endotoxins and lipids arriving from the gut. NLRP3 inflammasome activation is now identified as a central mechanism of non-alcoholic steatohepatitis progression toward cirrhosis. Pharmaceutical companies are spending billions developing NLRP3 inhibitors. Punarnava root contains a dietary inhibitor. A clinical trial found Punarnava root extract significantly reduced hepatomegaly, liver enlargement, liver enzyme elevations, and inflammatory markers in patients with liver disease after 4 weeks. A separate randomized trial confirmed significant improvement in liver function parameters in patients with alcoholic liver disease. The traditional use, Punarnava root decoction consumed daily. Available as a standardized root extract. The ancient world that called this plant the one that renews was describing the hepatocyte regeneration that modern liver science is now measuring with biopsy and blood markers. 13. Boldo, the sacred South American leaf that stimulates bile. Pumice boldus, a tree native to Chile and the Andean region, but whose mechanism connects it to the principle of liver support that appears in every healing tradition on earth. Like cat's claw for joints, like California poppy for sleep. Boldo represents the convergent discovery of the same liver-protecting plant chemistry found independently by ancient peoples who had no contact with each other. And here is what modern hepatology says. Boldine, the primary alkaloid in Boldo leaf, is one of the most potent natural antioxidants ever measured in liver tissue specifically. It reduces lipid peroxidation in hepatocyte membranes, the process by which oxidative stress converts the fats inside liver cells into toxic aldehyde compounds that damage cellular structures. It also stimulates bile secretion and has demonstrated specific hepatoprotective effects against acetaminophen-induced liver damage, one of the most common causes of acute liver failure in the developed world. The European Medicines Agency has approved Boldo leaf as a traditional herbal medicine for digestive and liver complaints. A formal regulatory endorsement for a plant that traditional South American healers have used for liver health for centuries. The traditional use, Boldo leaf tea consumed before meals. The taste is strong, aromatic, slightly bitter. The ancient South American healers who discovered this tree were finding the same principle that biblical world healers found in their bitter roots, that the liver responds to bitter plant compounds with increased function. 14. Dandelion flower, the weed in your garden that produces 40% more bile. Here we are at number 14, the one I told you about at the beginning. The Journal of Pharmacy and Pharmacology study. The 40% increase in bile production. We already met dandelion root earlier on this list, but the flower of the dandelion contains a distinct compound profile from root, and its specific effect on bile production is remarkable enough to deserve its own entry. The dandelion flower is not decorative. It is medicine, and across the ancient world where the dandelion grew, which is everywhere in the northern hemisphere where food has been cultivated for the last 10,000 years, it was consumed as an ordinary spring food, not a supplement. A flower eaten at the table, in salads, steeped as tea, or cooked as a vegetable. And here is what the Journal of Pharmacy and Pharmacology study found. Dandelion flower extract increased bile production and bile flow by up to 40% in the experimental model studied. This is not a marginal effect. A 40% increase in bile flow means a 40% improvement in the liver's primary waste removal mechanism. Every toxic compound the liver packages in bile, processed drugs, hormone metabolites, environmental chemicals, bacterial endotoxins, is cleared 40% more efficiently. The traditional use, fresh dandelion flowers added to spring salads. Dandelion flower tea steeped from fresh or dried flowers. The ancient world that picked dandelion flowers in spring as an ordinary food was performing a seasonal liver cleanse through the most direct dietary mechanism available. 15. Beetroot, the biblical blood builder that protects the liver from fat. Beets were cultivated in the ancient Near East and Mediterranean world throughout the biblical period. The beetroot was consumed as a food and the leaves as a vegetable. And in the ancient medical traditions surrounding biblical civilization, beetroot was prescribed for conditions described as thickening and sluggishness of the blood, the ancient clinical observation of impaired liver detoxification and metabolic dysfunction. And here is what modern hepatology has found. Betaine in beetroot, also called trimethylglycine or TMG, is one of the most studied dietary compounds for liver health. It directly donates methyl groups to the methylation cycle, the biochemical pathway the liver uses to convert homocysteine to methionine and to conjugate toxic compounds for excretion. When methylation is insufficient, homocysteine accumulates and fatty acid metabolism in the liver is impaired. Betaine specifically addresses this. A randomized controlled trial found betaine supplementation from beetroot significantly reduced liver fat content, liver enzyme elevations, and liver stiffness, a measure of fibrosis, in patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease after 12 weeks. A separate clinical study confirmed betaine significantly improved methylation capacity and reduced the inflammatory markers driving fatty liver progression. The traditional use: fresh beetroot consumed as a food, beet juice, beet greens as a cooked vegetable, the whole plant the ancient world consumed with its leaves, stalks, and root delivering betaine, nitrates, and betalain simultaneously to the liver that needed all three. 16. Gentian root, the bitterest plant in the world that wakes the liver up. Gentiana lutea, the bitterest plant known to exist. So bitter that a single drop of gentian tincture remains detectable by taste when diluted to 1 part in 12,000. Used across ancient European and Near Eastern medicine for over 2,000 years for exactly the condition described by its taste: the sluggish liver, the slow digestion, the body that is not processing what it takes in. The bitterness of gentian is not incidental. It is the signal. In every healing tradition that has studied bitter plants and the liver, from Ayurvedic to traditional Chinese to European herbalism to ancient Near Eastern medicine, the consistent finding is this: intensely bitter plants stimulate the vagal nerve pathways that increase gastric acid production, enzyme secretion, and bile flow. The bitter taste is not just a sensation. It is a pharmacological trigger. And here is what modern research says. Amaurogenin and geniopicroside in gentian root stimulate the bitter taste receptors in the duodenum that trigger the entire digestive secretory response. They increase bile acid output from the gallbladder, increase pancreatic enzyme production, and reduce the gastric emptying time that determines how efficiently nutrients are extracted from food. The traditional use: gentian root tincture in small amounts before meals. Gentian root tea, extremely small amounts because the bitterness is intense. The ancient world that used the bitterest plant available for the sluggish liver was using the most direct pharmacological trigger for hepatic secretory function that existed. 17. Oregon grape root, the western berberine source that protects liver bile ducts. Mahonia aquifolium. Oregon grape, a plant of the Pacific Northwest that carries berberine, the same compound we have studied for cardiovascular health and cancer prevention, in its root and bark. And for liver health specifically, berberine's mechanism is distinct from its cardiovascular and oncological effects. And here is what modern hepatology says. Berberine activates AMPK in hepatocytes, the cellular energy sensor that reduces fatty acid synthesis and increases fatty acid oxidation in liver cells. This is the primary metabolic mechanism driving the reversal of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. When AMPK is active in liver cells, they stop storing fat and start burning it. when it is inactive, as it is in insulin-resistant, metabolically stressed adults, fat accumulates progressively. A meta-analysis of 7 randomized trials found berberine significantly reduced liver fat measured by ultrasound, reduced ALT and AST, and improved insulin sensitivity in patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. A separate clinical trial found berberine comparable to the pharmaceutical metformin in improving liver enzyme profiles in metabolic syndrome patients. The traditional use: Oregon Grape root tincture or berberine-containing plant preparations as decoctions. Available as standardized berberine extract. The ancient compound that precedes pharmaceutical hepatology by millennia. 18. Greater Celandine. The ancient liver herb used by Roman physicians. Chelidonium majus. Greater Celandine. The orange sap that bleeds from its broken stems was used medicinally across the ancient Mediterranean world. Pliny the Elder described it as a plant that cleared the eyes, but Roman physicians more broadly prescribed it for conditions of the liver and gallbladder that presented with jaundice and impaired digestion. It was present throughout the ancient Near Eastern world bordering biblical civilization. And here is what modern hepatology has found. Chelidinin and coptazine and greater celandine stimulate bile production and have specific antispasmodic effects on bile duct smooth muscle, relieving the biliary spasm that causes the right side abdominal pain that characterizes gallbladder dysfunction. A clinical trial found greater celandine extract significantly reduced right upper quadrant pain, improved bile flow measurements, and reduced liver enzyme elevations in patients with biliary dyskinesia, impaired gallbladder emptying. The traditional use: very small amounts of greater celandine leaf tea. This plant requires careful dosing. It is effective in small amounts and potentially hepatotoxic in large amounts. The ancient physicians who used it were working with precise, traditional knowledge about quantity. The plant is real. The research is real. The preparation requires precision. 19. Rosemary. The hillside herb that activates liver detoxification enzymes. Rosemary grew wild across every hillside of the biblical Levant. It was the herb that went into every cooking pot, every bread preparation, every roasted meat, consumed daily across entire lifetimes by every household that lived in range of it. And here is what modern hepatology has found specifically for the liver. Carnosic acid and carnosol in rosemary are among the most potent inducers of phase 2 detoxification enzymes in hepatocytes ever identified in a food plant. Phase 2 enzymes, including glutathione S-transferase, quinone reductase, and UDP-glucuronidosyltransferase, are the liver enzymes responsible for conjugating toxic compounds and making them water-soluble for excretion. When phase 2 activity is high, the liver clears carcinogens, drug metabolites, and environmental toxins efficiently. When it is low, as it is in nutritionally depleted, metabolically stressed adults, those compounds accumulate. A study published in the British Journal of Nutrition found rosemary extract significantly increased phase 2 enzyme activity in liver tissue. A separate study confirmed rosemary reduced hepatic oxidative stress and improved lipid metabolism in animals fed a high-fat diet. The traditional use: rosemary used generously in cooking at every meal. Applied as a herb to meat specifically, a practice the ancient world maintained that was incidentally increasing the phase 2 enzyme activity that would process the same meal's metabolic byproducts. 20. The liver practice. The daily discipline the ancient world maintained without knowing why. And here we are at number 20. Not a plant. The practice that connected every plant on this list into the system that kept the liver of the ancient world functioning across entire lifetimes without the fatty liver disease, metabolic syndrome, and chemical toxin exposure that is destroying the liver of the modern world. Leviticus 17 verse 11. The life of the flesh is in the blood. The ancient world that wrote those words organized its entire food culture around the assumption that what you put into your body determined the quality of that blood. And the quality of that blood was determined by the health of the organ that filtered it. Modern hepatology has confirmed what Leviticus observed. Liver health is not determined by one plant, one supplement, or one dietary intervention. It is determined by the cumulative daily pattern of what the liver is asked to process versus what it is given to protect itself. The ancient world that consumed bitter plants at every meal, that ate herbs and roots and dark greens as ordinary daily food, that fermented its food and consumed the live cultures that fed the gut bacteria protecting the portal vein, that used olive oil, turmeric, garlic, and herbs not as supplements but as the food itself, was maintaining liver function through the continuous daily delivery of hepatoprotective compounds at concentrations that no supplement protocol has ever replicated. Because supplements are not food, food is not supplements. The liver responds to the whole pattern. The ancient world understood this not as a scientific insight, but as the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of watching what happened to the people who ate certain things daily and the people who did not. The liver is the most regenerative organ in the human body. It can rebuild itself from 25% of its original mass. It can recover from damage that would permanently destroy any other organ. What it cannot do is recover from continuous damage without the plant compounds that support its repair mechanisms. Those compounds are still here. The food culture that delivered them is teachable, and the liver that is waiting to receive them is more capable of recovering